And the point of gaslighting is to get the target, excuse me, is to get the target to accept the gaslighter's version of the story, which is exactly what we have seen in America, is that America insists, that it was not founded as a place where inequality was a part of the design, that it was not founded on inequality. It tries not to teach its history of imperialism and imperial violence in, the Philippines, for instance, in Puerto Rico, in South America, not to mention the horrors of slavery and how terrible and just how heinous the system of chattel slavery was in America. And we're continuing to see these attempts to do that with, Republicans today who try to say that there was no coup on January 6th, 2021. People trying to ban books or recommending that certain books be burned because they tell the truth about American history. This hysteria around CRT, critical race theory, and all these things, are ongoing, instances of a systemic effort to tell us, especially tell us Black people, that we don't really understand our reality and we need to just accept the gaslighter's point of view.
Do you believe in love 'cause I'm alone? Do you believe in hell 'cause
Welcome to the Deconstructionist Podcast. I'm your host, John Williamson. And before we get into this week's guest, I just wanted to give you guys a little insight into what's going on in my life right now. Normally wouldn't necessarily do this, but obviously for those of you who have been steady listeners, A, I appreciate you, and B, obviously there haven't been a ton of new episodes recently, and so wanted to give you guys a little insight into what's going on and perhaps why that has been the case. So, I believe that people go through seasons. And right now, my season is complicated and trying, I think, is the word I'm looking for. It's been one of those. It's been one of those last 6-month periods. So just a number of things on a personal level have happened, and I'm essentially, at least mentally speaking, and perhaps emotionally, just trying to stay afloat at the moment. So. Someone very, very, very close to me. I will respect their privacy, but someone very, very close to me in my immediate family has been diagnosed with cancer, and it's one of those situations where until that person goes into surgery, they won't really know the extent of how worried we need to be. And so I know they are very, very optimistic. We are all very, very optimistic. I think they've caught it early enough to the point where I think we'll see some pretty, hopefully, short and successful treatment. But there's probably a lot of you out there who have experienced it firsthand or have had a family member, close family member, go through that sort of thing. And either way, it's pretty scary, and you don't want to see a loved one go through something like that, but thank God for great doctors and great technology and advancements in science. So that's the big main thing right now. And as you can imagine, having conversations like that with young child, I have a daughter who is 8, about to turn 9 this fall, and just trying to make sure that I answer questions, but also, not freak her out. So that's been the big main thing, amongst some other smaller things that have all just kind of hit me at once. Work has been a little tough. I took on a new job promotion in my daytime, my main job, that has ended up being a little more work than I thought it was going to be. And so stretched a little thin at the moment. So I am trying my best. Fortunately, as I tend to do at the beginning of the year is front load a lot of interviews, so I can spend some time on editing and that sort of thing. And so I do have several that I'm very excited to release. But as you can imagine, setting aside time to sit down and edit has been tricky. And so I apologize for the lack of new content and activity, as it were. Still working on it. And I still hope to get some episodes out. I may need to take a slight break for a month or so this fall. But I hope to give you guys a heads up notice on that. Not going away, just might need to take a slight break just to catch up and that sort of thing. So more to come, but definitely, like I said, have some great episodes, including this one with Andre Henry that I recorded a couple months ago. Very excited to release this one. As we mentioned before, earlier in the year, I did a 2-part series on race and racism, specifically in America. And I think that's a conversation that is worth having again and continue to have in the future. And so I was fortunate enough to get Andre Henry on the show. And I have another guest that will be the next episode up that I'm very excited to introduce to you as well. A lot of you may be familiar with his work as well. So this week, Andre Henry, he is an activist, a musician, all around just a really smart guy, really thoughtful, the way that he kind of views the world. We talk about his kind of bolder social experiment that he did. I thought was fascinating. And so a lot of really interesting things to say and worth discussing. And so he's got a book out, All the White Friends I Couldn't Keep. So go check that out. It is out in bookstores now. Definitely pull a lot from that book throughout the interview. So hopefully you guys enjoy this. As always, if you like what we're doing here, please go to iTunes, rate us, review us, and recommend us to friends, and make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss a single new episode. If you go to our website, www.thedeconstructionist.com, you can listen to our entire back catalog of episodes there for free. You can also link to us on social media. You can find our Patreon if you'd like to support us in that way. Or if you just want to get some swag, we've got a web store there where you can pick up a number of different t-shirt designs. We got some cool pint glasses and coffee mugs and all sorts of fun stuff there. But otherwise, we have a blog there as well that I've got some stuff I'm working on for that. So we should have some fresh stuff up there soon. But otherwise, thank you guys for hanging in there, being patient with the lack of new content recently. Like I said, I'm trying to keep all things going, but sometimes you go through, like I said, a season in your life where there's just a lot going on, and I've got to be aware of my own mental health and physical health as well, and so that's been a thing that's taken a little bit of a toll recently. So, as I always say, huge advocate for mental health. And, as I've started to go through some of these tough times, I've definitely upped my visits. So been going weekly. I just think it's good to have somebody to listen and to also help you kind of put things in perspective and kind of game plan from that perspective. So can't recommend the mental health aspect enough. So if you out there are going through a similar situation, or if you're just going through a particularly hard period of time in your life, there are people, great counselors, great therapists out there who can really, really help. I can't recommend it highly enough. So go out there and get it. One of our sponsors right now is BetterHelp.com. And, if you go there, we've got a discount going on right now. That's one of many resources that you can utilize for your mental health. So can't recommend it enough. Go out there and get the help that you need. With that, without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Again, this is Andre freaking Henry.
From myself, and no one's left to tell my tale. My ship has sunk.
All right, welcome to the podcast, Andre Henry. Thank you so much for being here with me
Thanks
today.
for having me.
Absolutely. Before we get into it, tell people a little bit about yourself, like what you do for a living and that sort of thing.
Sure. So I'm Andre. I am a writer, a singer-songwriter, and I do a lot of work around racial justice. So I run a racial justice institute at Eastern University. Yeah.
Beautiful. One of the things you left out, though, is you also have a degree from Fuller. And so you are well equipped to have these types of conversations at that intersection of faith and and race.
Sure.
So yeah, you left that part out. That's important. I love it. So, so tell me a little bit about your childhood too. Like a lot of folks that I have on, it's kind of interesting to know, how did you grow up? Were you raised in a particularly religious household or not really?
No, my household was not religious. I grew up in Stone Mountain, Georgia. My parents are from Jamaica. That's where my family is from. And my family is not religious in the sense that, we didn't all go to church together or pray together and all of that kind of stuff. But my grandmother did go to church a lot. And she went to an Assemblies of God church just around the corner from us in Stone Mountain. And it was an Assemblies of, I think, did I already say it's Assemblies of God? She went to Assemblies of God church over there.
Yeah. Bears repeating. It's fine.
And me and my older brother, we went to church with her. And I just fell in love with the church. And that is how I ended up ascribing to Christian faith, if you could say that. And then, going into ministry and getting a couple degrees in theology and all that kind of thing.
So you got the bug thanks to grandma and ended up. So what was kind of your plan? Like, obviously you talk about in the book, music has always been part of the plan. So what was kind of the plan going to seminary when you got out? Like, what were you intending on doing?
Well, when I got out of seminary, okay. So my undergrad, I got out of, I got a bachelor's in practical theology, and then I graduated, and I was saying I just want to do music, But then I went to New York, and I went to New York to do music, and I ended up still doing ministry, which I needed a job. If nothing else, it wasn't just that, but I had a degree in theology, and I ended up being a worship pastor and teaching pastor there. And then from there, I wanted to learn more about the Old Testament because I thought maybe I might want to be an Old Testament professor. And so then I moved to LA, to Pasadena, to go to Fuller. But by the time I left Fuller, I had already decided that I didn't want to go into teaching theology. And part of that was, just honestly not really knowing where my faith, what I believed about God anymore. And part of that has to do with the political awakening that I write about in my book. A lot of that was happening while I was at Fuller. So by the time I graduated, I just didn't know. One of the big questions I had was if theology is even useful, for to help with the struggle for Black liberation. You understand?
Yeah. You do talk a lot about, obviously for a lot of us, 2016 was a pretty turbulent year. And you talk about in the book how the election of Donald Trump changed a lot of things. And one of the things it changed was it seemed to really embolden white nationalists on a level that I didn't think was even possible. And I think for a lot of us, it shoved racism, kind of brought it to the surface and shoved it right in our faces. And it suddenly kind of occurred to everyone like, hey, we always just kind of assumed, racism is kind of this far off, distant historical thing that happened in the 50s and 60s, and MLK came along and everything progressively got better. And it's like, nope, we're still very, very much behind and in need of some work there. Yeah. So talk about that a little bit, like when the election happens, some of the things that you started to see.
Well, I was just starting to understand before Donald Trump, actually, just in the years just before he became president, was what we mean when we say systemic racism. I didn't really understand what systemic racism is. And so I lived with the misconception that racism is personal and individual and all that, just like an emotional problem. And then I start to learn about the history because, I watched Philando Castile bleed to death on Facebook Live in the summer of 2016. And I said to myself, I have to learn everything that I can about how that system works, or what we mean by that system and how the system works. So by the time Donald Trump was elected president, I had a new understanding of America anyway, because I understood that that is how racial progress seems to happen, is that you have movements for Black freedom, and those movements are, what do you want to say? Attacked, challenged, undermined, responded to, whatever you want to do, by counter revolutions from white America that are fascist in nature. They're by nature. They're these what some scholars have called a preventive fascism, a preventive fascist counter-revolution. And so that's what we were living through when Donald Trump was running for office, and you see all of these white people saying, yeah, we need someone like that in office because he's going to preserve our way of life and keep white people from being dispossessed and all of that. Was racism more overt? I think Donald Trump was more overt, right? And
yeah, or I guess a better way to ask that question is it seemed, not to say that the racism wasn't always there all along. I wonder if the folks who were already racist, as it were just felt more emboldened.
Oh,
like
for
it was
sure.
More
Yes,
like,
of course. There were people, now you have David Duke, celebrating on election day saying, our people definitely got Donald Trump into office. And so there definitely was a more overt, character of this. And you saw all of these new white nationalist groups beginning to form around 2016, 2017. I mean, you may even be able to say 2015, with Dylan Roof's attack on a church in Charleston that summer. But for sure, the Proud Boys, I think, and some others, the Charleston riot, I guess you'd call it. I guess you could call that a riot, all that kind of thing. And so we definitely started to see kind of the veil pulled back on American history and on American racism and on people's commitment to white power, for sure.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It seemed, it was eye opening as a white male who clearly was very, I don't know, oblivious, I think would be probably the right word to a lot of what was already there. It seemed shocking.
Yeah.
I thought, we're better than this, man. We're better than this. And then after it had gone on for so long and you just see, these violent police confrontations and straight up murders and some, in a lot of instances, it was sickening. It was absolutely disgusting to watch. As you said, you watched, some of these things on, I think social media probably has shined a spotlight on a lot of it where, it probably was a little bit more discreet maybe before. And now it's, you can't do anything without, a spotlight on you, thanks to social media and the internet and instant information.
Yeah.
And it's been hard to watch, man. So, talk a little bit about, like, in chapter 1, you kind of lay out the purpose of the book, and you state very clearly that it's not about, converting racists over to becoming non-racists. And you use this term, you talk about the apocalypse, which I loved, and you refer to it as embracing the apocalypse. Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, so what I do in the book is I use the apocalypse as a kind of analogy, and it's kind of the organizing principle around the book, because I learned in getting these 2 theology degrees that I'm not using that much anymore. But I learned that apocalypse is simply an old Greek word that means to unveil or to reveal. And, usually an apocalypse was written to make commentary about politics, about the social political moment that the author and their audience is living in, like the one that we have in the Christian Bible, the book of Revelation, right? which is constantly being used in some way that I don't think that it was written for, because
Agreed.
because everyone wants to pretend that the book of Revelation was written for modern day people, but it wasn't. It was written by a political prisoner living in the first century under ancient Rome, and he was writing to his people who were subjugated by the Roman Empire, and he wanted to disrupt their patriotism, basically, because
sounds oddly familiar,
because
doesn't it?
what empires are very good at doing is making patriots of the oppressed, and so that's why it was written. And so I feel like that is something that I have experienced in my own life, and I see in our culture is that the myths of America's greatness and innocence and heroism throughout the world is used to keep Black people, especially, I think, from fighting for our own freedom and liberation. And so I hoped, and I'm writing because I wrote the book that I felt like I needed years ago. And I would say that I needed an apocalypse. And I know people today that I think still need that need to kind of wake up to see the system, to see the system of racism, the system of violence and domination that this country, and not just this country, but this country included, has always been. And so that's why I use that analogy, because I think that it's apt to talk about a type of intervention that needs to happen that can wake up oppressed people who have been lured into admiring and aspiring to be like and to participate in the project of their oppressors.
Yeah, that's such a good way to put it. Intervention. Yeah. It does feel like much of America needs an intervention, a wake-up call. I think it's chapter 2 you talk about just how racism has evolved, and it reminded me a lot of Dr. Drew Hart's book. I don't know if you're familiar, but
I know of him,
he wrote a
but
book
not
called The Trouble I've Seen.
Oh, wait. Sorry, I'm thinking of
so
another
good.
Drew. I'm thinking of Dr. Drew.
Oh, that guy. Yeah, no.
No, I know who Drew Hart is, and I know his book, Trouble I've Seen. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yes. Oh, no, it's okay. That's funny. Dr. Drew Hart, little different, but yeah, he talks about, his book was really informative for me, just because he talks about, kind of what you're talking about in chapter 2, where racism is at this stage in the game is so inherently baked into the system that racism has become, in a lot of ways more subtle. It's not like it was in the 60s where you necessarily see somebody burning a cross in somebody's front yard, but it's become part of the system now. And you talk about that, you talk about forced busing and states' rights. And so the conversation changed. It was more veiled, but it was still always there.
Of course.
So talk about that a little bit.
Well, I mean, you just mentioned it. I mean, I tried to be careful about saying, that now it's baked in. It was always baked in, right? The founding fathers
absolutely.
were racist people. They, they believed that most or many of them, believed that African people were not human beings, and that is how they justified keeping them enslaved, while they wrote all of their beautiful documents about how all people are created equal and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, that's a part of it. And what happened in the 60s during the Nixon presidency is that you had these politicians who decided that because the civil rights movement was doing what mass mobilizations are so good at doing, which is changing the values and changing the culture. So they realized that if they continue to campaign using overtly racist language and all those kinds of things, that it's not going to be as popular. It's not going to be as socially acceptable. The political weather has changed. And so they start using colorblind rhetoric while continuing to pursue, racial inequality. So, yeah, that's what happened. But we're not really taught about those things, right? So, and I talk about in the book how because we don't learn those things in school, and yeah, we don't learn those things in school. It's not the narrative that's really talked about a lot in the media, or at least it hasn't been until more recently. A lot of people don't know those things, and so when we talk about racism, it's very easy for many people to assume that the civil rights movement took.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, like it all went away magically
exactly.
after. Yeah, it's like, no.
Yeah, because the thing that we think is that, or it seems like people think is that the problem was just, people saying the N-word every day and openly, and the lynchings and the whites only signs. And those were certainly problems, right? But even Dr. King, especially near the end of his life, was talking a lot about how, racism has to do with an unequal distribution of wealth and power and rights and privileges.
Absolutely. So talk about, like, you use this term in the book, racial gaslighting. Explain to listeners what that means.
Well, yeah, if you know gaslighting, racial gaslighting, right? Gaslighting comes from a play where this man is playing around with his wife's gas-powered lights and telling her that they're only flickering in her head, and so that became this term to describe a type of abuse where someone tries to make you question the nature of your reality. And the point of gaslighting is to get the target, excuse me, is to get the target to accept the gaslighter's version of the story, which is exactly what we have seen in America, is that America insists, that it was not founded as a place where inequality was a part of the design, that it was not founded on inequality. It tries not to teach its history of imperialism and imperial violence in, the Philippines, for instance, in Puerto Rico, in South America, not to mention the horrors of slavery and how terrible and just how heinous the system of chattel slavery was in America. And we're continuing to see these attempts to do that with, Republicans today who tried to say that there was no coup on January 6th, 2021. People trying to ban books or recommending that certain books be burned because they tell the truth about American history. This hysteria around CRT, critical race theory, and all these things, are ongoing, instances of a systemic effort to tell us, especially tell us Black people, that we don't really understand our reality and we need to just accept the gaslighter's point of view.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah, you're right. Critical race theory has become this kind of tagline. It seems that politicians always find this tagline to latch on to rail against, to kind of, push votes and retain power and that sort of thing. So, like, I feel, and I find that a lot of times when you actually, sit down and try to have a conversation with somebody about something like critical race theory, they can't even tell you what it means.
Right.
Right. They actually have they just know it's bad. They just know it's bad and terrible and we shouldn't, So explain to people what that actually is.
Critical race theory? Basically, critical race theory comes out of critical legal studies where, we're talking about this very thing. People in the field of law were saying, that America has always encoded racism inside of the system, and they're showing how it was encoded into law. I mean, but you have to go to law school to learn that. Like you learn critical race theory in law school or in a degree program in college if you're taking race studies or sociology or something like that.
Yeah. So what is their argument then? I guess I don't fully understand it either. Argument? Are they suggesting that this is something like these Republican politicians, because they keep screaming about it? Are they saying that's something they're trying to teach? They don't have an argument, and that's the point of me talking about gaslighting. When you're arguing with
debating or arguing with a gaslighter, they're not talking to you in good faith. So it's not even worth going into the details about what critical race theory is and where it came from and what points these Republicans are making, because if you counter a gaslighter's point, they're just going to pivot to something else. Because the point is not to have this conversation. The point is to undermine the conversation altogether.
And it seems also to confuse people as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. The point,
because I hear it and I'll be honest, I have no idea.
The point is to destabilize you so that you can remain under their control.
Like it feels like weird psychological tactics.
That's why, you know, when you ask what is the gaslighting, it's a type of psychological abuse.
Yeah. And so when applied to racism, it's basically telling the person who is suffering, who's at the who's on the receiving end of the racism, that they're not actually experiencing what they're saying they're experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that is exactly what we're told.
And it kind of goes back.
We're imagining racism where it isn't, or that the problem is really that, you know, we just won't pull up our pants or stay married or you know, stay in school or stay employed and all these things. And we don't talk about the systemic obstacles to, you know, Black people having what we need, you know, to thrive.
Yeah. That makes me think of Dr. Miguel de la Torre. He talks about that idea that people are like, well, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And he's like, do you realize that all of your historic wealth was based on free labor and stealing resources from my people? And it's like, wow. And to your point, like, that's not something that we learn in history class.
No, we don't. You know, we don't learn that. And, you know, even beyond that, how the government gave, you know, certain people, you know, I'm thinking of the GI Bill, right? And, you know, making sure that white families have homes and all those kinds of things, that people don't connect their success or their wealth or, you know, those kinds of things to these historical, you know, events.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like, you know, you have this entire section of the country that is prospering, and nobody takes a moment to realize that it's based off of the back of absolutely free labor. Of course they're prospering. Yes. They don't have to pay their employees. That's insane. You know, like, of course they are, you know. I would love to have a ton of people work for me for free, but that's not the way reality works. No. You know, like, come on. Oh, man. One of the things that really hit a button with me too in the book is you talk about the right to be angry. And I remember when the protests started, and the narrative is like, oh man, like, these folks are so angry and stuff. I'm like, yeah, of course they would be. Wouldn't, you know, if this kind of shit had been happening for years over and over and over again, and no one is listening to you, they have every right to be pissed off. Yeah. Like, yes. So talk about that a little bit, like where you discuss that concept in the book, like the right to be angry. Yeah,
you know, because there's the trope of the angry Black man or angry Black woman. You know, I for a long time I was afraid that I would be labeled angry, because once white people label you as angry, then they tell themselves that they don't have to listen to you anymore. You know, they don't have to take you seriously because they're not taking your anger seriously, because they're also not taking your pain seriously. They don't take the history seriously, right? And so basically what they're trying to tell you is that you shouldn't trust your own body, right? Because your body is a source of wisdom. Your body actually communicates much faster than your rational brain does, the executive part of your brain. White supremacy wants for us to stay in the mind, because the mind is where you can rationalize all kinds of things. You can rationalize all kinds of things away in your mind. But your body, you know, your body is giving you most often, or maybe I shouldn't say most often, but often your body is giving you true information. You know, I say I temper that because I'm considering what trauma does to the body, because sometimes trauma, you have a trauma response to something, and maybe you're not experiencing that exact danger, but something feels familiar, And maybe you might be mistaken about that, but that's not how white people are talking to us. They're just talking to us like we don't know what we're talking about, because we're not repeating the story that they were given in school about themselves, about their country. So when I talk about the right to remain angry in the book, I'm talking about breaking free of the fear of being labeled as an angry black person, because the anger is valid, especially because the system has not changed, not enough to where, we can just all, be happy and just say, all right, well, we're all equal and we don't have to talk about this anymore. No, like we still have so much, there's the racial wealth gap, and we saw black people disproportionately dying from COVID-19 or catching COVID-19, during the pandemic phase because of all of these systemic channels that were already built into American society. So I write about that, and writing about also how anger can be constructive, how first off, it means that we understand what's happening to us. That means that our body is working, it's doing what it's supposed to do. So that's a good sign. And second, that if you're angry about something, that means your body is telling you that something is not right. It means that, your body is saying things should not be this way. And if your body knows that, if you know that, then you must have some idea of how things ought to be, which is your vision of tomorrow. And that is like the first thing that you need for building movement. For building a movement for change, you have to start with the vision of tomorrow. And so I get into that in that chapter and talking about how, if you care about this, but you don't know where to start, then maybe you should think about what makes you angry, because like I said, if you know that things ought not to be that way, then you know that, things ought to be some other way. So maybe that's where you should be working. Maybe you should find other people or an organization that's working on that so that you can join that.
One of the things that you also talk about in the same chapter that I think came to the forefront, it came to light. I think a lot of people are educated during the protests because a lot of statistics came out. And I know, like, for a lot of people, facts don't matter anymore. For me, I think facts still matter. Still think facts are very important. But the fact of the matter is, like, and you talk about this in the book, is there is a massive disparity between the ways in which white people are treated by law enforcement and the way that black people and people of color are treated by law enforcement. It's undeniable. The facts prove it. It shows it. And you talk about, you give a great example of the white terrorist Dylan Roof, who literally walks into a church and shoots and kills 9 people. And not only do the police not gun him down, but they're able to arrest him and even took him to Burger King. And we see, it just seems like every week there's another black man who is dying at the hands of law enforcement. And it's like, why did it have to get to that point? And so talk about that a little bit.
About the discrepancy between white and black people with the police? Yeah,
the lived experience. Like, there's obviously, as I said, the statistics don't lie. I mean, there's a huge gap between, I
feel like it's very simple, like it just, and people can look at the studies. There was a Harvard study in 2020 that showed that black men were 3 times as likely to be brutalized by the police in a police encounter. In 2016, that number, I thought it was 5 times as likely, but there are studies every couple of years that come up with the same result. Black people are disproportionately brutalized by the police. Black people are disproportionately incarcerated, and it's not because it's not because there's more crime amongst black people. First off, the reason why you live by people that look like you most of the time has to do with white supremacy in the first place, And so, people want to say, I'm bringing that up because a lot of people's rebuttal has been, black on black crime. But actually, when you look at the data, the crime rates in black and white communities proportionally are very similar, And that's because white people tend to live by other white people and black people tend to live by other black people. If someone's going to rob you or steal or, or kill somebody or whatever, they're going to usually do that. They're not driving across town,
Right.
to go do that,
Right.
But yeah, black people are, disproportionately arrested for, or have been for marijuana possession. I say had been because marijuana is being legalized and decriminalized in many different places, and so things are different. But when it wasn't that way, black people would suffer much more severe consequences for marijuana possession or be stopped and searched for drugs at a much higher rate than their white counterparts, even though white people are statistically more likely to be carrying contraband on them. And why would they be, right? Why would white people feel more comfortable carrying contraband? Because you're less likely to be stopped. Doesn't that make sense? Right? You can look at the 80s and look at the punishment for doing crack cocaine and doing cocaine, Why? Because crack cocaine was more prevalent in black neighborhoods, And when we want to talk about how it got there, in the first place. But, you can go down the list.
Yeah, I mean, the whole war on drugs was massively disproportionate in terms of its effect on
absolutely and the
society.
Architects of the war on drugs. We have recordings of them and interviews that they did where they spelled out that the war on drugs was a war on activists, anti-war activists, and black people. It's documented.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ugh. One of the things that you have in the book that I thought was very powerful is you talk about this social scientist and activist Brian Martin, who wrote extensively in his book Backfire Manual. He explains that oppressors use a common set of tactics to avoid upsetting the public. They cover up their crimes, devalue their victims, reinterpret their actions, use official channels to give an appearance of justice. And if all else fails, intimidate or bribe their victims into silence. And then you say, and this is a brilliant quote, Black America has watched this pattern of outrage management about black suffering for years. Yeah.
That is kind of the rhythm that we've seen, when Ahmaud Arbery was shot. We didn't hear about that for like 3 weeks. There's the cover up, As soon as we hear about one of these things, they want to tell us what kind of drugs were in their system when they were killed. Why does that matter? Well, because they want to associate that person with crime, And they did the same thing with Trayvon Martin when they show, and Mike Brown and all these other people, when they show you the pictures, and they want to show you the pictures online where this person will look like what you might call a thug, right? So people can say, well, he might not have done anything wrong when the police kill him, but he wasn't he was no angel, right? Right. He was no angel.
I remember
right.
that, yeah.
Of course, people love to say that he was no angel. So, all right. I don't even remember off the top of my head because, but the cover up, devalue, using official channels. This happened with George Floyd, I believe, because it took the whole world to protest to convict Derek Chauvin. I don't think that Derek Chauvin would have been convicted if the whole world didn't protest. And so, so the way to stop the movement momentum is actually to put him on trial and convict him. So now everyone will go home because to them, that's justice being served. When really justice being served is no more George Floyd's. When the only justice for George Floyd is to abolish the systems and to look at the conditions that led to his death and to make structural changes so that type of thing doesn't happen again. But we'll settle for Derek Chauvin going to jail. That's a whole nother podcast episode.
Yeah, he's the sacrificial lamb, as it were.
In a sense, you could say it like that. But that's that's a part of the using official channels and I think after that, I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but you get what I'm saying. You can go down the list, and then intimidation is the last one. And, of course, we've seen that with the police literally just beating down protesters or offering them jobs in government. You can also offer activists, jobs in government or in, high positions in NGOs or something like that. And that can also stop the movement, But, this is what Brian Martin writes about in his work, and I think that it's very powerful, and I think that people should really pay attention to it.
It was a really strange and terrifying thing to see the amount of police brutality that occurred even during the protests, where just to try to silence the crowd. I mean, we had it happen here in Columbus. We had protests downtown, and we saw even members of the press get maced or tear gassed or whatever it was. But I mean, it just seemed like they didn't care who it was. If they felt like you were protesting or a part of it, they tried to silence you as quickly as possible. And it was almost always through the use of force.
Yes, of course. They don't want for us to organize this kind of thing, and that should tell us how powerful it is. And that's the thing about this conversation about racism, is that we're always having these conversations and saying, well, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And how can we change? And how can we come together? And all those things. But the truth is that racial progress in this country, racial progress has always been the result of people organizing resistance, right? It's always been the product of organized resistance on the part of the oppressed, And we're trying to have this conversation and talking as though we want solutions while bypassing that part. And I don't understand what makes us think that we'll be able to do that when it's not been done before, which tells me that people really do think that the situation is much different, right? They have to think that the situation is not as serious or as entrenched or as violent as it is, because they think that we're just going to sit down and talk. And if we just talk enough, then we'll understand one another and, we'll live happily ever after. Well, Black people already, for the most part, if Black people who have gone through this awakening or were always taught the truth, already have an understanding of this country and of how growing up in this system causes us to think and to act. In many ways, we understand some things about white America that white America doesn't understand about itself, So we don't actually really need to come to the table and both understand each other. No, we need white people to understand that they live in a colonized society and that they think a certain way because of that, and that they act and behave a certain way because of that, and to stop and to work together to dismantle that system.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, I think obviously there's a large portion of the country that still has not awakened to that reality yet. And you talk about, and part of your book, the name of your book is All the White Friends I Couldn't Keep. And so talk a little bit about what led to that. I mean, you talk in the book about your friend Kevin and some of the conversations you had, and just kind of probably what it showed you in terms of where we're at in our understanding.
Yeah, so the book and the title came from, an open letter that I wrote to the white friends I couldn't keep, the white people many white friends and family, that I considered family, that I grew up with, or I met in seminary, or somewhere along the way. And as I began to kind of get into, I kind of stumbled into activism. So as I began to that journey, many of the white people that I called close friends and family, they opposed, they disagreed, and they took issue with what I was doing. And so, they come out and, tell me that I'm a racist and, I'm part of the problem, and Dr. King would be so ashamed.
You're
of
a
me.
racist.
Yeah.
Wow.
All this kind of stuff. And so I wrote them an open letter, and I explained, Well, actually, before I wrote the letter, there were years of us going back and forth. And then I just had to say, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep having this basic conversation about whether or not racism is actually a problem, whether or not it exists, and all this kind of stuff. These are not my issues. These are your issues. I know racism is a problem. It affects me. I know that there's a way to fight it. I don't care if you don't think that. And I don't care if you think I'm not going about it the right way because you're not doing anything. So how would you know? You haven't tried anything. You haven't studied it, And it's crazy making to keep going back and forth with people who, again, are not actually trying to have the conversation with you. They're trying to shut it down. So I just said, all right, well, I can't keep doing this. It was hard. It was hurtful. I cried so many times thinking about these people and how I can't get through to them, But I knew that if there was no way for me to actually make progress by talking with people who don't want to move. So I wrote this letter to them online and it went viral. And, next thing you know, an agent reached out to me and he felt like there was a book that could be written from the blog, But I mean, yes, that's where the conflict in the book comes from, where the title in the book comes from, that's saying, for Black people that want to go on this journey, really anyone who wants to go on this journey is probably going to have people in their lives that you are close to that is going to think that you shouldn't be doing that. They're going to stand up against you. In this case, for me, because it was around Black liberation, it was a bunch of white people in my life.
Gosh, that it makes me think of like some of these conversations make me think of like it just doesn't make sense to me either. It's like the two of us trying to tell a woman who's been through labor, that, well, contractions aren't that bad.
Right.
It's like, what? I would have no idea what that's like, nor will I ever. Yeah. Right. And it seems to me a lot of that stems from just a lack of a willingness to humble ourselves enough to shut up and listen. I think a lot of times, like, we want to help, but our way of helping is to try to, like, say that we have the answers and we know how to fix it instead of listening to the people who are actually going through that very thing.
Right. And I write about that kind of unhelpfulness later on in the book because I find out that there are white people in the movement that I couldn't keep, because the thing is, and I'm reading about this also in The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. I always get nervous about pronouncing his last name, but talks about how it talks about the oppressed. Those who belong to the privileged group. How when they try to come and quote unquote help, they end up often causing the same kind of harm because they haven't, realized that the thing they're fighting against is in them, right? The world that you say that you want to dismantle is the world that formed you, is the world that taught you how to be and how to think. And so you have to also do some personal internal work to confront the ways that you have been shaped by that situation.
Yeah. And one of the things you talk about too is you talk about the fact that in order for anything to change, white people have to be willing to relinquish some power there, because right now, it's a lot of institutions trying to retain power at all costs, no matter what. And
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that is what we're talking about when we talk about racism. And that's the thing, is that racism is about power. And so if we're going to end racism, it has something to do with power, right? And that's what I keep saying is that, people want to have this conversation without talking about power, right? And so they think that if we just hug each other enough and have enough conversations, if we then, if we just listen to the last part of Dr. King's speech at the March on Washington enough, then we won't have to work on this. But racism has to do with our very existence as a species. The stakes are that high, as climate change is already impacting what we call the global South, Black and brown people are already experiencing climate disaster. Oh, and the IPCC, I think that's the name of the organization, I can't remember, but they linked, climate change to colonialism. Colonialism is part of this problem because it helped to establish an extractive, exploitative system, right? What those plantations and the way that they were farming, it hurt the land itself, and we're not giving the land we're not giving the land the proper time to rest and recover and to produce things in a sustainable way. They're indigenous people who have been forcefully, violently removed from their lands, continuing to be oppressed and marginalized. And some of them who rise up against these huge corporations that continue to harm the land are killed, right? The stakes are that high, There are black and brown people that live in America who lived in Louisiana when Hurricane Katrina came through, right? And devastated. So it's not just the global South; it also happens in America, right? Black and brown communities are more likely to be situated, in areas where the environment is harmful for human beings to live. And this is just me talking about ecology, right? But the entire system was built on this. But land is essential to the foundation of the system, right? Saying that white bodies get to exist here and black bodies have to exist somewhere else, right? And you can go from where you can trace that line to the segregated neighborhoods, to where the highways were built, right? And then you can look, and then you can trace from where the highways are built to the abandoned and dilapidated inner cities and the suburbs and those conditions and all that kind of stuff. We can trace this throughout. I mean, black people are disproportionately affected, in all of these different areas of society, and that all has to do with power. Who can change? Because power is about being able to accomplish a goal, right? So if you want to make things equal, you have to talk about who has the power, because to correct those kinds of things, right? You know that most of the racial wealth gap is student loan debt, right? If you were to cancel student loan debt, you would significantly reduce the racial wealth gap. Well, who has the power to do that, right? Okay. Maybe the federal government has the power to do it, but if they don't, do we, and I think that we do, but we have to, as people, take responsibility for doing that and organize it if we want that kind of intervention. Not every intervention can be that way, but there are some. And so I know I'm going on and on and on about this, but I'm saying that we keep on trying to have this conversation about racism as though we don't have to think about those things. But we do.
Yeah, and those feel like very tangible things, that we could organize around and accomplish. I think a lot of people are like, well, the problem's too big, it's too complex, I'm powerless. And so they just, for whatever reason, don't take action and don't help to solve the problems. But that feels like something that's very, very doable, right? Like, I had no idea that student debt would have such a massive impact in that way. I mean, I know a lot of my friends are just buried in student loan debt, but having that sort of impact on the inequality, I had no idea. That's
and the thing is, you can't. Okay, so I saw somebody post about this on Instagram the other day, and they're saying, that some people are saying about the student loan debt. Well, I had to pay mine, and so, they should have to pay theirs. And he said, and they're right. And I'm like, no, they're actually not right. If you want to look at it in a reductionistic way, sure. But you cannot actually have a complete conversation about student loan debt without talking about the economic head start that white people have had in this country. because land theft and genocide and slave labor, all of those things, and then not to mention, after emancipation, Jim Crow and all those things. Sorry, all them something is a patois thing. That's it's a verbal pause. All them something. But I think you understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm using more of my Jamaican accent lately and, speaking patois because I had a conversation with a friend the other day where she just put on a British accent and she said, "Do you do accents?" I said, "No, but I do have some. Obviously, Jamaica is one of them." And she said, "Oh," and I told her, I want to talk this way because when my father dies, who is the last person who's close to me really who sounds Jamaican, I don't want for them to be forgotten. I never want for my Jamaican heritage to be forgotten. And so I want for people when they talk to me, for them to know exactly where my ancestors come from the start. So on that note, I'm just going to go deeper into it because I've been kind of vacillating a little bit, but no, I'm just going to go into it and just make it just deep and nice and just make it just come out of my mouth and just, I'm just going to do it now because I've been shy about it. So now when people say, people say, when did Andre become Jamaican? It's gonna be when him dip on John Williamson podcast.
About midway through.
When they dip on the podcast with John Williamson. So, all right, what was I saying before I said about the student loan? So I said no, they're not right. They're not right about that because you can't have a complete conversation about this without factoring in the way that racism gave white people a head start. And so black people have been behind economically. They've been behind white people economically for centuries, not because something is wrong with us, not because we don't work hard on all them something. It's because of something systemic that happened. Now, could we just work hard and make up that gap? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know the answer to that question. But why should we have to do that? Right? If you go and look at a race, and I mean like a foot race, right? And on the track you have the first 3 lanes, they don't have any hurdles. But all of a sudden, when you look at the 4th lane, it has all of these hurdles in it, right? Well, you could say, well, if that man was fast enough, he could jump over all of those hurdles and still win the race. But why should he have to? Right? And so that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Kind of going back to the church and just tying in like Christianity specifically, that's my tradition as well. From my perspective, the church has not done a very good job at stepping up in the role in which it should be taking, during this period of time. Like I expected way more of a vocal response to a lot of these things happening, and it seemed like there was some, but not a lot, right? Like, so as someone who has 2 degrees in theology, how disheartening is that? Like you're waiting. I'm sure you, like a lot of us, are waiting for the church to step up and say, no, this isn't right. Yeah. And yet we see things like instances like you mentioned, Katrina, where there's a mega church down there that could house all the thousands of people and kept their doors locked. And I'm like, what is going on here?
Well, I did hope that the church would have been more active and confront these things, but I really did try. I tried. The reason why I don't call myself a theologian anymore, and the reason why I don't have that on my website and all those things anymore is because I tried so hard to get the Christian people around me to engage this struggle as a matter of discipleship, worship, Christian faithfulness, missions, whatever. I tried it all, you know. And I just got so much pushback, right? Just so much opposition to that. And, you know, I'm not saying that no Christians are about that, because there are actually a lot of Christians throughout history who have been, who have been anti-slavery and, been anti-racist and all those things. But, I just stopped because what you said, and I don't know if it was your tradition evangelicalism. Okay,
No.
okay. So,
No.
but I came from, the evangelical world. So, all that passion and, that they have for, in worship and about the Bible and all these things. I just thought naturally, this would make sense. But the history of that tradition in particular is, Jonathan Edwards was a slaveholder. And he's the founder of evangelicalism. And when you look back in church history, it's not just evangelical, but the Catholics and, it's just a part of a mainstream Christianity is the anti-blackness, is what I'm saying. It's taken me a long time to just say that. Racism has been a part of the Christian tradition, of many Christian traditions for a long time. Now, luckily, it's not the only tradition of Christianity that's ever existed in the world. And so, you have pastors that walk this trail of tears with indigenous people, and you have, abolitionists and people like Nat Turner and, and all that kind of thing. So you have other examples to look at. And for me, much of what I argue in the book is to stop trying to convince people who don't want to go, and to find those people. In this context, we're talking about Christianity. So, find those Christians, but it goes for anything, just find the people who know the truth, who share your values, who are willing to do the work, and work with them.
Yeah, I love that. That actually was my next question. So you beat me to it, but just talking about, this notion that, and you mentioned it before, you touched on it earlier, is that just white and black people just need to meet at the table and have a conversation as if, that's going to solve everything. And you mentioned that in the book, you talk about what you just said, is you need to find like-minded people.
The truth about unity is that divisive people create change. That's the truth about unity, right? And Dr. King was a very divisive person, and many civil rights leaders. The civil rights movement was a very divisive thing. It divided not just black from white, but it divided white people who wanted racism from white people who at least thought they didn't want racism, right? So that's one thing. But also the proverbial table needs some interrogation, because we're clamoring for a seat at a table that we shouldn't even be sitting at, right? Because what a lot of people don't understand is, like I said before, the stakes are extremely high. Human existence is on the table as a species, right? Extinction is on the table. And extinction is on the table largely because of this capitalist system, the global capitalist system that we live in. And like Cedric Robinson said, there is no capitalism without racism. That is how modern capitalism came to be. You don't have all of this capitalist industry growing without the slave trade. That was the labor that created the commodities and the profits, right? And now that system, that logic is continuing up to now. And now the whole human species is in danger, right? So if you think you want a seat at that table so you can win at that game, you're asking to play a part in our extinction. We need a different table or a different piece of furniture altogether.
Maybe just some chairs. Maybe not even a table. Oh man. So I know we're getting close on time here. So what is kind of your hope, your general hope for the book? For me, I know it was massively educational, but what do you hope for folks to gain from this book?
I hope that people, that they read it and that they get fired up about social change and that they understand that it's possible, for us to make a change. I hope that movements use this book, that they recommend it to newcomers into the movement so they can get an understanding of how social movements are built and what makes them stronger. And, what really, and I think that this comes out in the book, what really changed my life was reading. I studied and I read so much, and those books changed my life, and it gave me the idea that, I can make a difference, with people, and that we can write history together. And so I am hoping that my book will do the same for other people.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I love your work. By reading this, I would have thought it was like your 15th book. It's just really well written, and Thank you. And like I said, super educational. So I appreciate what you're doing. Where can people keep up on what you're up to, and where can people grab a copy of this book?
The best place is to go to my website. It's andrehenry.co. That's where you can keep in touch with me. All my social media is there and all that. And my email list is there, where, I send out an email. I was doing it once a week, and then I went once a month, and now I think I'm going back to once a week because there's just so much to say and to be done. So yeah, that's a great place to keep in touch, and you can get the book wherever books are sold, pretty much, especially the major retailers, and it's also done really well with the independent bookstores as well. So that could work too.
Good. Yeah, we try to support. Yeah. So, well, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it. This is a great conversation, and keep doing what you're doing, man. This is great work.
All right, great to meet you.
John was young and driven with a heart of gold. Finished seminary, married, found a church he could go home. Made a living, giving dying folks a shoulder and a hand, until he told his leaders that he had some feelings for another man. And they said, John, you must go and take your broken heart and walk it to the door. We know you're hurting and you've been giving, but now you're damaged goods and you gotta give some more. John, we love you, but we can't love you. You must go. Jen could sing a song and channel the divine. Spent a decade sharing it and kept herself in line, until her eyes began to see the light inside the dark. Then the floor of all she thought began to fall apart. And they said, Jen, you must go. We didn't know your quest would lead you down this road. We know you're searching we can't have you. You must go. Jane was born with skin darker than her peers. Spent a cycle telling them the reasons for her fears. No one seemed to know or care about the past. Then they showed her where she stood with every vote they cast. And they said, Jane, thanks for your time, but there's no room for you when there's power on the line. We know you're hurting, but we're not listening. And we'd help you out, but we don't have that kind of time. So go work harder, and you'll all be fine. You must go. So John and Jen and Jane were on the streets without a home, abandoned by the ones supposed to love and keep them warm. Then a voice fell on their ears, so familiar to their soul. And he said, child, don't you go. I want your broken heart and your beautiful soul. I felt you hurting, I've seen you giving, and I'll stay right here till you have the power to stand. They may not want you, but I know they need you. So let us go.